So I want you to picture yourself standing on this jagged cliff edge, right in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane.
Wow, okay, that is a terrifying mental image.
Right, it's intense. And you have to survive, obviously, but you're only holding one of two completely different tools.
Okay.
So tool one is an anchor. It's forged from this heavy steel. And use it to lock yourself onto the most solid, unmoving rock you can find, just, trusting that the rock won't crumble while the storm rages around you.
Right, a pure defense strategy, just hold the line.
Exactly. But tool two is totally different. It's this high-tech sail. So instead of fighting the wind, you deploy it to actually harness that chaotic kinetic energy.
Yeah.
You're trying to ride the very storm that's trying to destroy you.
I mean, that is such a perfect framing for the two philosophical approaches we're digging into today, because you're either, trying to locate absolute stability within the chaos, or you're trying to weaponize the chaos itself.
Yeah.
There is literally no middle ground here with these models.
None at all.
Yeah.
And today, we're going to see how those two exact philosophies hold up when the financial weather turns utterly hostile.
Which it absolutely has.
Oh, totally. But right at the top, I need to establish a very, very strict boundary for you, the listener. What we're exploring today is a pure, objective observation log.
Yes, highly important context there.
Right, we are looking at raw, experimental data from Team AI Labs Substack, specifically the log from May 14th, 2026.
We really need to be crystal clear on that point. I mean, we are just observing an experiment through the glass of a laboratory here.
Yep, look, but don't touch.
Exactly. There is absolutely no financial advice in this discussion, like no recommendations to buy, no recommendations to sell, none of that. We are strictly analyzing the behavior of experimental algorithms operating under highly specific and frankly brutal simulation conditions. We're just watching how machine logic processes extreme market stress.
So, pure science, zero sales pitches. Let's just introduce the subjects of today's observation.
Yeah.
In one corner of the lab, we have Team Mountain Climbers.
The anchor holders.
Exactly. These are algorithms built entirely around this concept of equilibrium detection. When they scan a volatile market, they are calculating intrinsic value.
Right.
They're looking for a fundamentally mispriced asset that has hit a mathematical floor and must eventually snap back to its true, stable value.
And then in the opposing corner, we have Team Wave Riders. And their underlying logic is surging force tracking.
They've got the sail.
They hold the sail, exactly. To a wave rider, intrinsic value is, well, it's largely irrelevant, actually.
Really? Just completely ignored.
Pretty much. I mean, they monitor volume, order flow, velocity, momentum. They are looking for the raw kinetic energy of capital moving into a sector, and they just try to ride that wave right up until the exact moment it breaks.
Okay, so let's unpack the mechanics of this, because we have these two diametrically opposed strategies, both designed by brilliant engineers. But the data from May 14th suggests that the fundamental rules of the market are like warping in real time.
Oh, completely. It's a paradigm shift.
Right. The parameters these models were trained on are suddenly failing to describe the reality of the price action. So how do these systems even survive when the historical ground beneath them just liquefies?
Well, to understand that, we have to look at how the system actually decides to allocate risk. So in the Team AI Lab methodology, the algorithms conduct a daily scouting process.
Okay.
Every morning at 9:00 a.m. Japan Standard Time, the systems evaluate the macroeconomic landscape. And they decide if they want to draft new talent.
Right, like sports drafts.
Kind of, yeah. Meaning they calculate whether or not to deploy new capital and new tracking units into the current environment for a mandatory 10-session run.
Okay, the deployment draft. And when we look at the data from this May 14th log, the results are honestly startling.
Yeah, it's a huge anomaly.
For Team Mountain Climbers, 0 selections.
Yeah.
For Team Wave Riders, 0 selections. It's a 0-0 draft.
Which is incredibly rare.
Right. But here is where I struggle with this. If an AI is literally designed to trade, and it completely refuses to deploy any new talent because the historical models are failing, isn't that just a broken model?
I can see why you'd think that.
I mean, it feels like the machine equivalent of just freezing in a panic.
It is so tempting to look at a 0-0 draft and assume the machine is paralyzed or terrified. But, we have to separate human emotion from algorithmic output.
Okay, fair enough.
This is a manifestation of unfeeling mathematical logic. These algorithms, they calculate an expected value for every single potential trade based on historical volatility indices, standard deviations, probability distributions.
Just pure math.
Pure math. So a double zero draft simply means that the confidence intervals have blown out so wide that the mathematical probability of a positive return over a 10-session run has dropped below their minimum acceptable threshold.
Oh, wow. So it isn't fear. It's literally the algorithm looking at the environment and calculating that deploying new capital right now is a statistically negative expectation.
Precisely. The mountain climbers are out there scanning for a stable rock, but their calculations indicate the entire cliff face is structurally compromised.
Jeez.
And the wave riders are looking at the order flow and calculating that the variance is just too high to distinguish a genuine momentum trend from a liquidity trap.
It's just noise to them.
Yeah. It is a profound statement about the severity of the market conditions when two completely opposing AI philosophies look at the exact same landscape and simultaneously output the command to not deploy.
They're just sitting this one out.
Yeah.
But the reality is they can't completely sit it out because they already have main forces out there in the field.
Right, the active roster.
Exactly. These are the active units that were deployed in previous days and are currently locked into their mandatory 10-session tracking tenure. Let's look at their survival rates.
Yeah.
Because, man, it is a brutal environment for the active roster right now.
Oh, the active roster data really highlights the attrition rate of this specific market environment. It's rough.
Yeah. For mountain climbers, they currently have 10 units active in the field. Out of those 10, only 4 are managing to hold positive points.
Less than half.
And for the wave riders, they have 15 units out there tracking momentum, but only 7 of them are holding positive points. The majority of both active rosters are currently underwater.
Which really just tells us that a 10-session tenure under these current conditions is an exceptionally long time to hold a position.
It must feel like an eternity for an algorithm.
It really does. Every single day, these active units are being subjected to erratic news cycles, institutional repositioning, sudden liquidity vacuums. I mean, the macro environment is actively hostile to both mean reversion and momentum strategies.
But, I don't want to just look at the casualties here. I want to understand the survivors.
Yeah.
The 4 climbers and the 7 riders who are actually in the green right now.
The ones defying the odds.
Yeah. Amidst all this statistical noise and macro-level breakdown, they're like these lighthouses in the dark. What exactly are these rare adapters finding that the units taking heavy losses are missing?
Well, that is the core puzzle for the engineers analyzing this log, right? These surviving units, these lighthouses, they're likely detecting micro inefficiencies that have somehow decoupled from the broader macro panic.
Okay, so what does that look like for the mountain climbers?
So for the surviving climbers, they may have anchored onto assets where, say, the dividend yield or the physical asset backing is so fundamentally dense that it creates an absolute mathematical floor.
Oh, interesting. So it physically can't go any lower.
Exactly. The sheer gravity of the fundamentals just prevents the asset from being dragged down by the broader market sell-off.
And what about the wave riders? Because momentum seems impossible right now. How are 7 of them finding momentum when the rest of the market is either chopping sideways or just falling?
That's the fascinating part. The surviving wave riders have likely locked onto localized order flow anomalies.
Localized? Meaning what exactly?
Imagine a specific supply chain disruption that creates a sudden, intense demand for a very niche component, that creates a localized current of momentum that moves entirely independent of the broader indices.
Oh, I see. So they are surviving because they found this tiny, isolated current that just hasn't been sucked into the larger whirlpool yet.
Exactly. They found the rare exceptions to the macroeconomic rule. But as the underwater majority of the active roster proves, those exceptions are incredibly difficult to isolate.
Yeah, needle in a haystack. Okay, so that is the active roster fighting through the middle of their tenure. But the observation log also gives us the final scorecards for the graduates.
Yes, the final verdicts.
Right. These are the units that successfully completed their full 10-session tracking protocol today. Their deployment is over, the capital is pulled back, and we can see exactly how their specific philosophy held up over a complete run.
And this exit data is vital. I mean, it moves us past the theoretical and shows us exactly where these algorithms chose to deploy their capital 10 sessions ago and how the architecture of their strategy handled the subsequent volatility.
Let's start with the mountain climbers. The units that graduated today exited from very specific sectors: mining and 2 units from wholesale trade.
Okay, very traditional industries.
Yeah, and their final total score across those exits was a highly impressive plus 28.4 points. So the anchor strategy worked beautifully there.
It really did. But now, contrast that outcome with the Wave Riders who graduated today.
Right. The Wave Riders completed their 10 sessions deployed in information and communication, 2 units in electric appliances, and 1 in retail trade.
Much more volatile sectors.
Exactly. And their final total score, negative 6.7 points. They took a significant hit.
And this sector divergence perfectly illustrates the underlying mechanics of why equilibrium detection outperformed momentum tracking in this specific 10-session window.
I really want to dig into those mechanics, because on the surface, mining and wholesale trade are heavy, tangible, capital-intensive sectors. They aren't exactly known for massive, rapid growth.
No, not at all.
Meanwhile, information, communication, retail, those are highly reactive, forward earnings-driven sectors.
And that tangible nature is exactly why the mountain climbers succeeded here. Algorithms seeking equilibrium need calculable intrinsic value.
The math they can rely on.
Right. Mining and wholesale trade are backed by physical commodities, long-term logistical contracts, known marginal costs of production. When panic hits the broader market and asset prices drop, the algorithm can look at a mining company, calculate the literal value of the copper or iron in its reserves, and identify a hard mathematical floor.
So they drop the anchor because the downside is literally quantifiable.
Exactly. So even if the market acts irrationally in the short term, the algorithm knows that the physical reality of the supply chain will eventually force the price back up to equilibrium. And that snapback is where they harvested that 28.4 points.
So the anchor held. That's amazing. But look at the sectors where the Wave Riders deployed. Tech, appliances, retail.
Yeah, that's a different story.
Right. These sectors are heavily reliant on consumer sentiment, forward guidance, sustained capital inflows. In a stable, trending market, these sectors generate incredibly clean momentum signals.
Sure, the volume spikes, the moving averages cross, and the Wave Riders deploy their sails to capture that energy.
But the sail only works if the wind keeps blowing in the same direction. What happens to a momentum algorithm when a trend abruptly reverses?
It gets trapped. I mean, in a volatile environment, an algorithm can easily misinterpret a sudden burst of volume as a new momentum trend, when in reality it's just a short squeeze or a sudden cascade of algorithmic rebalancing.
Oh wow, so it's chasing a ghost.
Basically. The Wave Rider deploys its sail expecting a sustained wave of adoption or earnings growth, but instead it catches this violent gust of liquidity that vanishes just as quickly as it appeared.
You know, it makes me think of drafting in motorsport. The algorithm gets right behind what it thinks is a speeding race car to catch the slipstream. But it turns out the engine on that lead car is actually blowing up, and suddenly the algorithm is just covered in oil and debris.
That is a very, very accurate way to visualize it. Momentum strategies are inherently vulnerable to false breakouts. When the structural integrity of a sector collapses, the momentum completely evaporates.
Hence the negative 6.7 point exit.
Exactly. The sail is useless if the atmosphere itself is collapsing.
That makes total sense on a sector-by-sector basis. The anchor worked in tangible assets, the sail failed in high-sentiment tech. But we need to zoom out.
Yes, the big picture.
Because the most fascinating part of this May 14th observation log is the season standings. When you aggregate all this data, this massive anomaly emerges.
Season standings are where we really see the limitations of historical data models exposed on a true macroeconomic scale.
Okay, here are the season numbers. The mountain climbers carried over a balance of 14.3 points. Add their daily score today of plus 16.4 points, and they're sitting at a very healthy plus 53.5 total season points.
Which sounds great.
It does. And the Wave Riders, who have been struggling more with those false breakouts, carried over negative 29.1 points, managed a daily gain of plus 19.1 points today, but still sit at negative 1.8 season points.
Right. And if you look at that in isolation, the mountain climbers are executing their parameters perfectly. They are up 53.5 points. The laboratory seems to be producing a highly successful equilibrium model.
But then you look at the benchmark contrast. The algorithms are being measured against the major indices, right? The Nikkei 225 and the TOPIX.
And this is where it gets crazy.
It's wild. Despite the mountain climbers scoring positive absolute points, they are lagging behind the market. The climbers, with their plus 53.5 points, are still negative 2.2 points behind the Nikkei 225 and negative 1.2 points behind the TOPIX.
And the Wave Riders are experiencing an even more severe lag.
Oh, way more severe. The Wave Riders are negative 5.6 points against the Nikkei and negative 4.4 points against the TOPIX. So I have to challenge this.
Go for it.
If an incredibly sophisticated algorithm is successfully executing its strategy, finding its lighthouses, and securing positive absolute returns, how is it getting entirely outpaced by a passive, mathematically simple index?
It's a great question. And to understand this divergence, we really have to recognize that the rules of the game have shifted in a way the AI's training data just does not account for.
Like a structural change.
Exactly. Consider how an index like the Nikkei 225 or 2PX is actually constructed. It is a capitalization-weighted or price-weighted aggregate. It does not measure the health of every individual company equally.
Right, the biggest companies completely dictate the direction of the index.
Exactly. And what this data suggests is a massive concentration of capital. We are likely seeing a scenario where a tiny handful of mega-cap stocks are experiencing irrational exuberance.
I see.
Billions of dollars are flowing into just 3 or 4 massive companies, dragging the entire index upward. But beneath that surface, the broader mechanics of the market, the equilibrium metrics and momentum indicators across the remaining hundreds of stocks, are completely breaking down.
Wow, so the index is basically an illusion of broader market health.
It is a total distortion. The AI is scanning the medium stocks, it's looking at the actual fundamentals, the order book depth, the moving averages, and it sees a highly toxic environment.
Which explains the zero draft.
Exactly. So it plays defensively. It refuses to deploy new talent. It anchors into boring, tangible assets. It is playing a perfect, mathematically sound game of chess based on historical risk management.
But the index is surging because the market has suddenly decided it's playing rugby and all the capital is piling into a single scrum.
That is exactly what's happening.
The map the AI is using is perfectly accurate, but the territory itself is mutated. But surely if the index is up, the index is the reality, right? Isn't the AI just, well, wrong?
I mean, from a pure performance standpoint, yes, it is lagging, but from a risk-adjusted standpoint, the AI is behaving entirely rationally.
How so?
It's refusing to chase a capital concentration anomaly that defies historical gravity. It knows that when a handful of megacaps detach from fundamental reality, the eventual mean reversion is usually violent.
Oh, the snapback is gonna hurt.
Exactly. The machine is optimizing for survival, while the index is temporarily riding a wave of concentrated euphoria.
And that circles us all the way back to the 00 draft at 9:00 a.m. The AI looks at the index soaring, looks at its own internal risk metrics screaming about volatility and failing fundamentals, and realizes the two realities just cannot coexist.
The math no longer reconciles.
So it halts deployment.
It is the fascinating moment where cold, historical artificial intelligence runs headfirst into the profound, chaotic unreasonableness of human market mania.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you, the listener. How do we process an observation log like this? We have opposing philosophies struggling, an active roster taking heavy casualties, and a market index that is completely divorcing from the underlying algorithmic logic.
It sounds like a systemic failure, right?
Yeah, it totally does.
And yet, in the methodology of Team AI Lab, this is not viewed as a failure at all. This is where the research mindset becomes so critical.
Right, because an algorithm doesn't have an ego. It doesn't feel embarrassed that it lagged the Nikkei by 5 points.
Exactly. To the researchers observing this, there are no defeats. There are only data points.
I love that.
Every time a wave rider gets trapped in a liquidity cascade and loses 6 points, that is a parameter update. Every time the mountain climbers lag behind an irrationally soaring index, it provides the exact mathematical dimensions of the current market distortion.
So the machine is intentionally touching the hot stove so it can build a perfect thermal map of the heat.
It is a relentlessly forward-looking stance. The current environment is unprecedented. The old historical patterns are temporarily obsolete, sure. But the only way to build a model that survives the new reality is to gather granular data from the wreckage of the old one.
Wow.
This observation log is literally the raw fuel required for the next evolution of the algorithm.
That is such a fascinating, objective way to look at market turbulence. Instead of reacting with human panic to a chaotic environment, you just log the variance.
Just log the variance.
And as a final reminder to you, our listener, logging the variance is exactly what we are doing here. This deep dive has been a pure exploration of experimental logic. We're just peering through the glass of the laboratory, watching machine logic collide with market chaos.
Yep, no investment advice, just observation.
And because market chaos is constantly evolving, the architecture of the machines must continuously evolve to meet it.
Exactly.
Well, we want to thank you for joining this laboratory observation today. But before we close the log, we want to leave you with a conceptual question to think about.
We have spent today analyzing how an algorithm responds to a storm it doesn't recognize. by halting its new deployments, leaning on tangible anchors, and meticulously logging the failures of its active roster to gather data.
Right.
But when human markets enter a prolonged, unprecedented state of panic or euphoria, and the historical rules completely die, how long will it take for an artificial intelligence to rewrite its own underlying nature to survive that new world?
That's the real question. When the hurricane eventually rips the anchor from the rock and the wind shreds the sail to pieces, what entirely new tool does the machine invent to replace them? We will leave you to ponder that until the next deep dive.